Well, tanks, today things are going to be fun, because in a way you're all a little bit of a loser. Blizzard dropped this. It is a post detailing their vision for the war within, and it is tanks who are not as self-sufficient, right? Tanks who rely on their healer to survive. Tanks with less self-healing and quite a lot less in terms of passive damage reduction. Let me tell you, that struck the fear of God into tank commenters. Thankfully, though, the changes are not as brutal as some people have worried. So 3 areas have been impacted. Number 1, self-sustain. Number 2, passive mitigation. And number 3, secondary defensives. Things like Eye of Tyr losing duration and consecration losing damage reduction for paladins. But they're big buttons, right? Say Ardent Defender and Guardian, those went untouched. Or say things like healing getting reduced on the Death Knight's Leeching Strike, Druid's Frenzied Regeneration, and Demon Hunter's Soul Cleave. That kind of thing. So, when you're not popping off your big defensives for big hits, your healer's going to have to spend a little bit more effort topping you up, right? But in a way where that's actually a good thing if they were able to hit their design goals. Essentially, whenever a tank is a massively self-sustaining, near unkillable god, the problem is, it's like, well, how do you basically challenge a god? You've got to hit them extremely hard. That would mean super spiky healing, that would mean just getting globaled, and Blizzard basically want to de-escalate that situation. So the idea is that healers, yes, they will just be spending a bit more time, like topping people up, but what we're supposed to get in return for that bargain is less spiky damage and less BS. But of course, well, only time will tell. Going back to the tanks though, most of you have been hit with roughly the same size of nerf bat. I should say, these are not changes in pre-patch. These are things that are going to be there with the expansion launch, so you won't actually feel them yet. The other side of this then is what the expansion's dungeons actually feel like. Basically, they're jammed full of mechanics, patrols, chain casting mobs, and that kind of thing. So knowing your pulls and perfecting your CC, that is going to be more intense and important than ever. Now, sure, that is technically an everyone problem, but we know how World of Warcraft works. For most of you tank players, you're kind of in the role because you got trust issues and you'd rather just do the important shit yourself. I suppose all I'll say is good luck this time, you'll kind of need it. If you're a masochist, it's amazing news, but like seriously, do expect to have a little bit more of a rough time tanking until people adjust. Now, there is a bit of a silver lining because despite all of this, 2 specs come out of this transition substantially improved, so it's a lot of fun to have when we dive into these. Of course, supported by today's sponsor. So here's a situation that impacts all of us: data leaks. Data leaks happens all the time, and like vultures who are hungry for a meal, data brokers harvest up that data, and then you and me have got to deal with spam or worse. Now, your legal right to be removed is hindered by it just taking ages to do and being hard to monitor, but that is where incogni.com/Bellular Warcraft comes in to solve the problem for us. They automate the whole process, and with code Bellular Warcraft, you get 60% off an annual plan. Now, for an update from me, 57 completed requests, 9 in progress. I've been added to 21 suppression lists, and that means that my data will not be picked up by those brokers again. Now, they've also shipped support for adding even more of your own information there. So as an example, I've added in another home address and another email. So I'll let you know what the results of that are in a little bit. The point is, right, data broker stuff can be spooky. Of course, the data brokers themselves can have data breaches. People can then just use the data they've harvested for ill. And basically, if there's a bunch of lists out there, those lists are juicy targets, and I'd rather not be on them. And that is why Incogni is a great service. Incogni takes your data down, and then it keeps your data down by continually rescanning. And you can try them out today with 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/Bellular Warcraft. Brewmaster's come out on top with the best changes. Bot and bloat is pretty much a thing of the past with the loss of Healing Elixir, White Tiger Statue, and Bone Dust Brew, and also Chi Wave moving to being a passive. There's then a ton of damage smoothing that's added via the new Ox Stance talents that basically just increase how much you're staggering in big hits, so that's really nice. Some removed talents and lowered point costs then just leave you a bit more freed up to pick things within your tree, which does feel quite nice when you're actually building out your character. You've got more access to your immense levels of utility with the class tree changes as well. There's a massive 15% out of combat move speed, which just makes life easier, and on top of that, the tank changes to be a little bit less self-sufficient will, in theory, work a little bit better for you monks because you've got stagger. Those nerfs even came in with a general rebalance so that you guys are a little bit more beefy and a little less reliant on dodges, but sadly, hero talents are both kind of passive and boring. Still, despite that, Brewmaster is just one of the 2 tanks that is coming into the war within feeling much better than before. The prunings work, the tune-up's good. The other winner then is the Blood DK, and it's a clear winner, but there's a minor caveat, and that's the Death Strike now only heals based on the same damage taken once, so you can't answer getting walloped with an absolutely huge series of heals, which is kind of unintuitive, but it should not be too big of a nerf, because smuggled in with that change is a pretty awesome UI update actually. The amount the Death Strike heals for is now shown by a buff, and that means that you can track it without using a weak aura, which is pretty big for WoW's baseline playability. Otherwise then, the class tree shakeup has been excellent. Soul Reaper is a fun addition. Losing a power rune weapon and its juicy haste does suck a little bit, but I think it's overall worth it in the long run. Then the core talent updates are pretty awesome. Bone Storm now spends your bone shield stacks instead of runic power, which brings that back in a pretty huge way. Then Blood Drinker and Consumption are basically turned back into must-have talents by beefing them up quite a bit, and then also adding resource generation to them. Death and Decay uptime is now tantalizing close to 100% with a grace period that effectively extends it by a pretty huge 4 seconds, actually, when you get down to it, so that feels great. And the hero talents, thankfully, are wins. Sandlane adds plenty of fun and fantasy to the spec with massive haste stacking and, of course, Vampiric Aura. Deathbringer then adds the gorgeous Reaper's Mark ability. It turns your Blood Boil blue as well, which is just kind of neat. And basically, it's a strong tank that puts an absolute ton of power in your hands, to the point where Blood may be one of the only examples of WoW having a high skill ceiling that is actually rewarding enough to be worth reaching. Now the next winner is Paladin, and that's all down to minor fixes and pretty decent hero talents. On the talent changes, Consecration's 4-second grace period is once again absolutely massive for staying alive on the move. Then updates to the spec tree just open up a bit more build flexibility, which is certainly nice. It'll certainly feel good, you'll feel a bit less limited. Things like Soaring Shield and Focused Enmity no longer being a choice node, so that's great. And then in the hero talents, well, Lightsmith allows you to throw weapons that are made of the light at allies for bonus DPS. It's a really cool fantasy. And then the other one, Templar, it's basically just a very, very cool fantasy-forward, damage-focused alternative. You're raining hammers down, and it feels amazing. Now, Prot Paladin will likely then remain the everyman tank for simple, effective defensives, and just being able to do crazy shit like throwing out a clutch lay in hands and blessings when needed. The only downside then is Word of Glory, where it just does struggle to keep up with the massively ballooning health pools that we're dealing with. And for our last winner, we've got the Warrior, and barely. It is essentially almost gone entirely unchanged, with hero talents actually doing the heavy lifting here, but thankfully both Mountain Thane and Colossus are pretty nice additions to the game. Now, Mountain Thane just adds loads of juice to Thunderclap. It adds the wonderful Thunder Blast proc, and it turns Stormbolt into a 3-target stun, which is awesome. Colossus then gives you the Demolish channeled ability, which you're either going to love or hate, but if you love it, you'll probably love it, and it makes you 5% bigger, because every little bit counts, gents. Then you've got the new Fight Through the Flames talent. This will go down pretty well, because it gives you a flat magic damage reduction to defensive stance, and also, defensive stance no longer reduces damage dealt, so that's pretty good too. Now, the class tree changes are not really game-changing here, but they do give you a bit easier access to Shockwave, which is certainly nice. So to bring things together with some of these buffs and the hero talents, Warriors are fun and capable. It would be a different story if they had issues that went unresolved, but honestly, right, going in with a few changes, while it's not a lot, it has just kind of left them in a pretty good state, mostly chilling. They're not perfect, but they're happy enough. Losers then. So, Demon Hunters, yeah, it's kind of mixed for you guys. You're basically back down to 1 sigil charge for everything except Flame, and that does mean say goodbye to your infinite stops and CC. And then there's the hero talents, of course. Aldrachi Reaver throws in a bit of a witch button first minigame on top of things, but generally it does feel a little bit underwhelming. And to give you some detail on that, every few souls that you eat, it transforms your Throw Glaive into a new attack. And once you use that new attack, then hitting Soul Cleave and then hitting Shear will activate one effect for AoE damage, but if you do Shear and then Soul Cleave, it will increase one target's damage taken for a little bit. And that is kinda cool, but that's really it. Then Felsguard is entirely just boring passive additions. And that's it. Congratulations. You're still immensely sturdy tanks, right? You've got loads of utility, you've got amazing movement, so yes, you're losers because you're not really winning off this expansion, but you're certainly not going to feel the sting as much as our next group. Guardian Druids, literally no talent changes and your hero talents are a big L. All melee lost talents to give them extra range, and Guardian is of course the only tank who ends up feeling like a real victim of that. Then, Astral Influence does not give you the massive thrash and swipe range that it used to, so that'll feel kinda shit. It's minor, but then not having Moonkin form as an option also removes Flap, so you can't negate fall damage as easily as you could have. Then Elun's Chosen, right? It's mediocre, the hero talent, and Druids of the Claw is just a little bit better. I mean, it might be fun for min-maxing DPS because of Wild Power Surge, allowing you to shift into cat form for a bit, though most of the tree is like just okay passives, right? So that's just disappointing. The class tree changes did not make the spec any less restrictive, and they offer almost nothing new or upgraded, which just sounds shit, right? It remains a reasonably easy and effective tank. It's got good enough damage input, but the move to War Within basically changes nothing, and it adds very little. And that does mean that compared to everybody else, Guardian is maybe the tank that is the least clearly designed and the least coherent. It's not bad to play, it's just bloody boring. And that's it for the tanks. Outside, right, of the overall change of how tanking is going to feel, I'd say tanks are actually in a pretty solid place, both as, the individual classes and also as a role, but I would basically say the worst crime here is negligence, right? Just stuff not being done. I mean, we've come a long way from expansions gutting classes entirely or making very controversial changes. If you like your class, you're probably not going to feel awful as you go to play it in this new expansion, but you might be jealous by what some of the other people are getting, and certainly Guardian Druid, all I can say in that is just, what are they doing? What's the vision? And I can't help but think Feral is slowed down a bit, and to many people won't feel as good. Balance is a extremely clear loser, and Guardian is also a clear loser. It just makes me wonder, like, Druid is one of the most popular things in the game. Why are they so conservative with it? Or is it the case it is so popular that they're just afraid to make changes? I don't know. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know which one of these is the most alluring to you. With that said, if you want to check out something next, we've done videos on both melee and ranged, and healing is to follow.